la mujer apache Cayó rodillas, Puedo, servirte, dejas, vivir. Nima, a young Apache woman, walked carefully among the rocks and sparse shrubs, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. She had been wandering alone since her village was attacked. Her family had fled in different directions, and she had been separated from everyone she loved. Every step she took was careful, calculated, because she knew the world outside her home could be unforgiving. She carried nothing but a small bundle of cloth tied tightly to her back, containing a few belongings, some food, and a small keepsake from her mother. It was a simple stone pendant, smooth from years of handling, and it reminded her of home, of safety that now felt impossibly far away. Nima's heart raced as she moved forward. She remembered the chaos of that morning, the sounds of shouting, the smell of smoke, and the frantic cries of people she had known all her life. Her hands shook when she thought of it, but she forced herself to stay focused. Survival demanded that she put fear aside, at least outwardly. Every rustle of the grass, every distant bird call felt like a potential threat. She had learned to listen to the land, to understand its signs. Even in fear, she tried to read the messages that the wind and terrain offered her. As she climbed over a small rise, she spotted movement in the distance. A figure emerged from the shadows of the rocky outcrop, a man. He seemed alone, though armed, and carried the quiet alertness of someone who had learned to trust no one. Nima froze instinctively. Her mind raced. Should she hide? Should she run? But every instinct warned her that flight might not save her if he noticed her. The man's eyes scanned the land, and for a moment it felt like their gazes met. There was recognition in that glance, not of familiarity but of mutual understanding. They were both strangers in a harsh, unforgiving land. Nima took a slow, deliberate breath. She knew that any wrong movement could provoke him, and she could not afford that. Fear pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. Yet beneath the fear there was a spark of courage, a determination not to die quietly, not to disappear without a fight for survival. She took a step forward and then another, careful to make herself visible without seeming threatening. Her hands were empty, held in front of her as a sign of peace. The man stopped in his tracks, narrowing his eyes. He did not speak immediately. He studied her as if trying to read her thoughts. Finally, Nima spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "I can serve you," she said, falling to her knees on the dry, cracked ground, "if you let me live." The words came out in a whisper at first, almost lost to the wind, but the man heard them clearly. There was no arrogance in her tone, no pleading that made her seem weak. There was only honesty, desperation, and a will to survive. The act of kneeling, so full of humility and vulnerability, was also an act of bravery. She had placed her fate in the hands of a stranger, hoping that he would see her worth beyond her circumstances. The man, whose name was Ethan, observed her quietly. He had faced many dangers in his life and had learned to be cautious. He had encountered travelers, raiders, and desperate people seeking help or hiding from danger, but something about Nima struck him differently. Perhaps it was the calm determination in her eyes, or perhaps it was the quiet strength in the way she held herself despite being on her knees. He could feel that she was not merely begging for survival. She was offering herself as someone capable, someone who could contribute if given the chance. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind stirred the dust around them, carrying with it small leaves and dry grass. The world seemed to pause, as if waiting for the decision that could change both of their lives. Ethan's hand rested near his weapon, a habit from years of caution, but he did not reach for it. Instead, he studied her, trying to measure her sincerity. In the vast, empty plains, encounters like this were rare. Usually, fear and suspicion ruled every interaction. Yet here was a young woman, alone and vulnerable, presenting herself honestly and openly. That honesty, rare and fragile, demanded a response. Nima's mind raced as she waited. She thought of her family, of the people she had lost, and of the life that now seemed impossible to reclaim. She reminded herself that fear was natural, but survival required action. She had made a choice, one that left her fate in another's hands, and she had to live with the consequences. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan, searching for a hint of decision. She could not afford to falter now. Her life depended on it. Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Stand," he said. The word was simple, but it carried weight. Nima hesitated for a fraction of a second, then obeyed, rising slowly to her feet. She kept her hands visible, showing that she meant no harm. Ethan studied her again, his mind working quickly to assess the situation. She was alone, unarmed but clearly strong and alert. There was skill in the way she moved, in the way she observed her surroundings. She had the instincts of someone who had survived hardship before, someone who could be useful rather than a liability. Over the next few hours, Ethan watched her closely as they moved together cautiously through the plains. Nima proved herself capable, fetching water from a nearby stream, helping gather firewood, and observing the land for signs of danger. Each action demonstrated her intelligence, resilience, and adaptability. Ethan's initial skepticism began to fade as he realized that she was not just a frightened girl seeking mercy. She was a resourceful, capable individual who could survive in this harsh environment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Nima and Ethan settled near a small cluster of rocks for the night. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the plains shifted as nocturnal creatures began their nightly routines. Nima tended the small fire carefully, her movements precise and practiced. Ethan observed her quietly, recognizing the careful attention she gave to every detail. It was a skill that could save lives in this unpredictable land. Sitting by the fire, Nima allowed herself a moment to reflect. The journey ahead would not be easy. Trust was fragile, and the world around them was unpredictable. But she had taken the first step towards survival, and for the first time since the attack, she felt a flicker of hope. By facing fear directly, by kneeling and offering her life in exchange for a chance to prove herself, she had taken control in the only way she could. Ethan, watching the firelight dance across her face, began to understand that their meeting was more than chance. In the vastness of the plains, two strangers had crossed paths under extraordinary circumstances. One had chosen desperation, the other caution, and together they had created a fragile understanding. For both, this encounter marked the beginning of a journey neither had anticipated, a journey that would test their strength, courage, and humanity. Night fell completely and the stars emerged, glittering against the dark sky. Nima lay close to the fire, alert yet weary, her thoughts full of uncertainty and determination. The plains were vast and unforgiving, but she had found a lifeline, however fragile. She understood that survival would require more than physical strength. It would demand trust, adaptability, and courage. And for the first time since the chaos began, she felt that perhaps she had a chance, not just to live, but to reclaim some sense of control over her destiny. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, both Nima and Ethan settled into a tense but unspoken understanding. The plains were silent around them, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, they survived. In that moment, Nima realized something important. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, the plains were bathed in a pale golden light. The wind whispered through the grasses, carrying the scent of earth and distant mountains. Nima awoke before the sun fully rose, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had slept lightly, listening to every sound in the quiet morning. Survival demanded alertness, and she had learned that being vigilant, even at the cost of sleep, could mean the difference between life and death. Beside her, Ethan stirred, his expression calm but wary. He had also spent the night listening, thinking, analyzing. Both of them were still strangers in many ways, yet the events of the previous day had begun to build a fragile connection. Nima rose carefully and stretched, mindful not to startle Ethan. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years navigating difficult terrain. Her movements were precise and thoughtful, a reflection of both her physical skills and her mental discipline. She knelt by the small stream they had found the day before and washed her face, letting the cold water refresh her senses. It was a small ritual, but one that grounded her and reminded her of normal life, even amid chaos. She glanced at Ethan, who watched her silently, studying her as she worked. There was no judgment in his gaze, only careful observation, a sign that he was assessing her abilities as much as he was acknowledging her presence. "Gather wood," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm but firm. "We need to build a fire strong enough to last the morning and prepare food, and later we need to move before the heat grows too strong." Nima nodded and began to work, moving swiftly yet carefully through the sparse trees and dry brush. She picked pieces of wood that would burn well, avoiding brittle sticks that would crumble too quickly. She found small stones to build a stable fire ring, ensuring it would not collapse under the wind. Ethan assisted in silence, occasionally pointing out locations that might yield better materials. Though words were few, they communicated through shared purpose and observation. It was a language born out of necessity, one that transcended the limits of speech. As they prepared the fire, Ethan watched her closely. He had encountered many people in his travels, but few had shown the combination of intelligence, skill, and calm resolve that Nima possessed. She was not acting out of fear or desperation alone. She was deliberate in her actions, thinking ahead and understanding the consequences of each step. It was clear to him that she was not simply offering herself in exchange for life. She was offering herself as a capable partner, someone who could survive and adapt in a harsh and unpredictable world. By mid-morning, the fire crackled, and they began to cook a small meal from the food they had scavenged and carried. Nima handled the task with quiet efficiency, stirring the pot and checking the heat, while Ethan kept watch for any signs of danger. Their movements were synchronized almost instinctively, a silent coordination that grew out of necessity and mutual observation. For both, this was more than survival, it was the beginning of trust. And trust, fragile as it was, had to be tested carefully. Over the next few days, Ethan began to test Nima's resolve. He assigned small tasks at first, fetching water, gathering firewood, observing the land for any signs of danger. Each task was a test of skill, patience, and reliability. Nima met each challenge with quiet determination, showing that she could not only follow instructions, but also think independently when circumstances required it. She learned the rhythm of the plains, the way the wind shifted, the movement of animals, the signs that signaled approaching threats. Ethan observed her, impressed by her awareness and adaptability. One afternoon, as they traveled along a narrow path flanked by rocky outcrops, Ethan asked her to scout ahead. Nima hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility, but then she moved forward, crouching low and using the rocks for cover. She returned an hour later with information about the terrain, noting hidden paths and potential dangers. Ethan listened intently, nodding as he recorded her observations in his mind. It was clear that she could think strategically, anticipate problems, and provide valuable insight. This shifted their dynamic slightly. She was no longer just someone seeking mercy, but an asset in a world where every advantage could mean life or death. Despite the growing trust, challenges remained. The plains were unpredictable and survival required constant attention. One morning, they encountered signs of a nearby band of raiders, footprints in the dust, broken branches, and the faint scent of smoke. Ethan's instinct was to move cautiously, to avoid confrontation if possible. Nima, drawing on her knowledge of the land, suggested a hidden route through a narrow canyon that would allow them to bypass the raiders. Her plan was risky but carefully considered, and Ethan agreed, recognizing that her understanding of the terrain could save them. Together, they navigated the path, avoiding detection and strengthening the fragile bond between them. As days turned into a week, the two developed a routine. They worked together, shared tasks, and began to communicate more openly. Nima told Ethan about her childhood, her family, and the customs of her people. She spoke with pride of her heritage and sorrow for the losses she had endured. Ethan, in turn, shared stories of his life in the settlement, his reasons for venturing into the plains, and the loneliness he had felt. These conversations, though cautious, allowed them to see each other as more than just strangers or survivors. They began to see each other as humans, each with strengths, weaknesses, and experiences that shaped who they were. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in soft hues of pink and purple, they rested near a small spring. The air was cool, and the sounds of the plains at night surrounded them. Nima sat quietly, tending the fire, while Ethan watched her, lost in thought. He realized that trust was not something given lightly. It had to be earned through actions, patience, and understanding. Nima had earned that trust, not through words or promises, but through consistent demonstration of skill, courage, and reliability. In that moment, both understood that their partnership had shifted. It was no longer just about survival in the immediate sense. It was about creating a foundation of trust and respect that could carry them through challenges yet to come. The plains were vast and dangerous, and neither could face them alone. Yet together they had begun to form a bond that was stronger than fear, stronger than uncertainty. It was a bond forged in necessity, but it held the potential for something deeper: understanding, cooperation, and perhaps even friendship. The following days were filled with tests and lessons. Ethan would observe Nima in situations where quick thinking was required, crossing difficult terrain, avoiding natural hazards, and recognizing signs of wildlife or human presence. Each success reinforced his growing respect for her abilities. Nima, in turn, learned to rely on Ethan's experience, his knowledge of survival strategies, and his cautious, methodical approach to danger. They complemented each other, blending skill with intuition, strategy with instinct. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of a rocky overhang, Ethan spoke quietly. "You are stronger than you realize," he said, "not just in body but in mind. You notice things others miss. You think ahead. That is why you have survived this long." Nima listened, feeling a quiet sense of pride. She had survived not just through instinct but through thought, observation, and careful decision-making. Her skills, honed over years of living in her village and on the land, had earned recognition from someone who understood the harsh realities of survival. That evening, they shared a simple meal, sitting close to the fire as night fell. The stars were bright above them, scattered like diamonds across a velvet sky. Silence settled between them, comfortable and unforced. They did not need words to acknowledge the trust that had developed. It was in the way they moved, the way they observed each other, and the way they shared responsibilities. Both knew that the world outside could be merciless, but within their small circle there was understanding, reliance, and a sense of security, however fragile it might be. As Nima lay down to rest that night, she reflected on how far she had come. Just days before, she had knelt before a stranger, offering her life in exchange for a chance to survive. Now, she was no longer simply a survivor pleading for mercy. She was a partner, capable of contributing to their shared journey through the plains. She understood that trust could be tested and earned, and she had taken the first steps toward proving herself. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she felt a growing confidence in her ability to face whatever challenges lay ahead, alongside someone who had begun to recognize her worth. Ethan, watching the fire burn low, thought about the changes he had seen in Nima. From a frightened young woman on her knees, she had become a reliable companion, demonstrating courage, intelligence, and skill. He realized that survival in the plains required more than physical strength. It required understanding, adaptability, and the ability to trust. In Nima, he had found all these qualities, and more. The bond that had begun in desperation had grown into mutual respect, laying the foundation for whatever challenges awaited them. The plains were silent that night, filled only with the gentle sounds of nocturnal creatures and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Both Nima and Ethan slept lightly, alert to the dangers that could appear at any moment. Yet, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment and hope. They had faced the first tests together, survived, and begun to understand each other. That understanding, fragile as it was, gave them both a renewed sense of purpose. In the quiet of the night, Nima thought of her family, of the life she had lost, and of the uncertain future ahead. She understood that the path would not be easy, that challenges awaited at every turn. But she also knew that she had proven something vital, that she could survive, adapt, and earn trust. And in a world where every day was a struggle, that realization was a victory. The morning air was cool and crisp as Nima and Ethan moved cautiously across the plains. The sun had not yet climbed high, leaving long shadows that stretched across the dry earth. Both were alert, their eyes scanning every ridge, rock, and sparse tree line. Survival in these lands demanded constant attention. Even a small oversight could bring disaster. The previous days had strengthened their trust, but both knew the world around them remained unpredictable. Danger could appear at any moment, and vigilance was their only protection. Nima led the way along a hidden path she had discovered days earlier. Her knowledge of the land had already proven invaluable, and Ethan relied on her intuition as much as he relied on his own experience. She moved with quiet confidence, stepping carefully over loose rocks and dry brush, her eyes constantly searching for signs of movement. Ethan followed, his steps deliberate, his hand resting near his weapon, though he had not yet drawn it. The plains were deceptively calm, and both knew that stillness often hid threats. It was Ethan who first noticed the subtle signs of other humans nearby. A broken branch here, a footprint there, faint smoke rising in the distance. His senses, honed by years of travel and experience, immediately recognized the potential danger. "Raiders," he muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. He did not panic, but he did not underestimate the threat either. Nima, sensing the shift in his tone, crouched low behind a small rock formation. Her body tensed as she listened carefully, using all her skills to assess the situation. The two of them stayed silent for several minutes, observing from their hidden vantage point. Nima pointed to a path that curved behind a series of low hills. "We can avoid them if we move quietly," she whispered. Ethan nodded, recognizing her insight and trusting her guidance. The decision required careful coordination. One misstep could alert the raiders, and confrontation could be deadly. They moved slowly, using rocks and natural depressions in the land for cover, relying on patience, timing, and trust. As they crept forward, the sounds of the approaching group became clearer. Voices carried on the wind, rough and urgent, accompanied by the clatter of weapons. Nima's heart raced, but she kept her movements controlled, focusing on guiding Ethan through the safest path. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the plains, able to interpret even the smallest cues, the shift of a shadow, the direction of the wind, the distant call of a bird disturbed by movement. Each of these details helped them remain undetected. Despite their caution, they realized the raiders were closer than expected. A small skirmish of branches and leaves revealed a group moving through the terrain just beyond a ridge. Ethan crouched low beside Nima, his expression focused. "We need to act quickly," he whispered. Nima nodded, already planning their approach. They would have to navigate a narrow canyon that offered both cover and danger. One misstep and they could be trapped. As they entered the canyon, the terrain became more challenging. Rocks jutted out at odd angles, and the path narrowed significantly, forcing them to move single file. Nima led the way, using her knowledge of the land to guide them past sharp drops and unstable stones. Ethan followed, alert to every sound, every subtle shift in the environment. They moved silently, communicating only through gestures and eye contact, a rhythm they had developed over the previous days. Suddenly, one of the raiders appeared ahead, blocking their path. Nima froze, her mind racing for a solution. The man had not yet seen them, but any sudden movement could trigger a confrontation. She signaled to Ethan, pointing to a small crevice between rocks. "We can slip through there," she whispered. Ethan nodded, trusting her judgment. They moved carefully, crouching low and pressing close to the rock walls, inching past the raider without drawing attention. Once they were safely past, they paused to catch their breath and assess their situation. Ethan looked at Nima with a mix of admiration and gratitude. Her quick thinking and knowledge of the land had saved them from a direct confrontation. "You were amazing back there," he said quietly. Nima allowed herself a small smile, feeling a surge of confidence. She had acted not just out of instinct, but with skill and strategy, proving that she was capable of more than mere survival. The canyon eventually opened into a wider area, giving them a brief moment of relief. But the threat of the raiders still loomed nearby, and both knew that their journey was far from over. They decided to move swiftly, using the cover of trees and low shrubs to maintain distance from the group. Nima scouted ahead, her eyes sharp and alert, while Ethan kept watch from behind. Together, they navigated the tricky terrain, relying on their growing understanding of each other's abilities. As they moved, Nima reflected on the nature of trust and courage. Just days earlier, she had knelt before Ethan, offering her life in exchange for safety. Now, she was not just a survivor relying on someone else. She was an active participant in their survival. Her actions mattered and her decisions could save lives. This realization gave her strength and a sense of purpose that she had not felt since leaving her village. Meanwhile, Ethan recognized the transformation in Nima. She was no longer simply a frightened girl seeking protection. She had become a resourceful partner, someone whose skills complemented his own. He had tested her resolve, observed her actions, and seen her courage firsthand. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically, and to act decisively had earned his respect and trust. In the unpredictable world of the plains, such qualities were invaluable. As afternoon approached, they found a temporary safe spot near a small cluster of rocks and shrubs. They rested briefly, using the time to eat and drink, while remaining alert to any signs of danger. Nima shared some of her knowledge of edible plants and safe water sources, demonstrating her practical skills and deep understanding of the land. Ethan listened carefully, absorbing the information that could prove crucial for their continued survival. This exchange of knowledge strengthened their partnership, turning mutual reliance into a collaboration built on skill and respect. The threat of the raiders lingered in their minds, but both realized that they could not remain in one place for long. They needed a plan to continue their journey safely. Nima suggested using a series of hidden paths that she had memorized during her years living on the plains. Ethan agreed, recognizing the importance of moving strategically and avoiding unnecessary risk. Their conversation was quiet but deliberate, each decision carefully weighed and executed. As they prepared to move, the sound of distant voices reminded them that the raiders were still nearby. Ethan and Nima exchanged a brief glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were ready to face whatever challenges came next, relying on their growing trust and shared experience. Each had learned from the other. Nima had gained confidence in her ability to navigate danger, while Ethan had gained appreciation for her skill, intelligence, and bravery. The journey through the plains continued, each step a careful balance between caution and progress. Nima led the way, using her instincts and knowledge to guide them through safe passages, while Ethan provided strategic oversight and protection. Together, they navigated the unpredictable terrain, their movements synchronized by necessity and growing mutual understanding. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to reinforce trust and resilience. By evening, they found a safe spot to rest, hidden from sight and shielded from the wind. The fire they built was small, controlled, and carefully monitored. As night fell, the stars emerged, bright against the darkening sky. The silence of the plains was profound, punctuated only by distant sounds of nocturnal creatures. Both Nima and Ethan lay close to the fire, alert yet able to rest, knowing that their partnership had grown stronger through the trials of the day. In the quiet of the night, Nima reflected on the events of the day. She had faced danger head-on, used her knowledge and skill to navigate threats, and proven that she was more than just a survivor. She had earned Ethan's respect and trust through her actions, not just her words. This realization filled her with a quiet confidence, reinforcing her determination to continue their journey together. Ethan, meanwhile, considered the lessons he had learned. Nima's courage, intelligence, and strategic thinking had made a significant difference in their ability to survive. He recognized that their partnership was not merely convenient, it was essential. In a world filled with uncertainty and danger, they had become stronger together, each complementing the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. As they settled in for the night, both understood that the journey ahead would continue to test their abilities, courage, and trust. The plains were vast and unpredictable, and external threats could appear without warning. Yet, through their combined skill, strategic thinking, and growing mutual respect, they had proven that they could face these challenges together. The events of the day had solidified their bond, transforming a relationship born of desperation into one built on shared experience and resilience. The days that followed the encounter with the raiders were quieter, but no less important. The plains seemed calm, the wind moving gently through the grasses, the sun rising steadily over distant hills. Nima and Ethan traveled side by side, each step measured, each movement deliberate. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a rhythm born out of shared experience and survival. Though the dangers had momentarily passed, the world around them remained vast and unpredictable. Every decision, no matter how small, required thought, trust, and cooperation. Nima walked with a steadiness that had grown over the past weeks. She had learned to anticipate danger, to read subtle signs in the environment, and to act with precision when needed. Her confidence had grown, and it showed in her movements, in her eyes, and in the quiet strength she carried. No longer merely someone kneeling in desperation, she was a capable partner in navigating the plains. Ethan observed her, noting the calm determination she radiated. Her presence had become reassuring, her knowledge and skill were invaluable, and her courage was inspiring. Ethan began to share more of his own experiences. At first, his stories were cautious, brief accounts of life in the settlement and the challenges he had faced in his travels. Nima listened intently, her eyes reflecting curiosity and understanding. She asked questions, wanting to know about his life, his struggles, and the reasons he had ventured so far from home. Ethan found himself opening up in ways he had not anticipated. There was a mutual respect forming between them, strengthened by the understanding that each had faced hardship and loss. One afternoon, They rested near a small stream, the sunlight glinting off the water's surface. Nima shared stories of her childhood, her family, and the traditions of her people. She spoke of the ceremonies, the songs, and the values that had shaped her life before tragedy struck. Her words were rich with emotion, a mix of pride and sorrow. Ethan listened closely, realizing how much her past had molded her strength and resilience. He recognized that her knowledge of the land, her courage, and her resourcefulness were all products of a life shaped by culture, family, and survival. In turn, Ethan spoke of the loneliness he had felt in the settlement, the challenges of traveling alone, and the fear that came from facing unknown dangers. He told her of his early journeys, of the people he had met, and of the lessons he had learned along the way. Nima listened with empathy, understanding the vulnerability behind his words. For both, these exchanges went beyond simple storytelling. They were building trust, forming a bond that was grounded in shared understanding and human connection. Their journey continued with careful attention to survival, but there were moments of shared reflection and quiet companionship. At night, they would sit by a small fire, speaking softly while watching the stars appear in the vast sky. The plains, which could be harsh and unforgiving, offered moments of beauty and peace, moments that allowed both of them to recognize the value of connection. In these times, Nima realized that trust was no longer just about survival. It was about recognizing the humanity in another person, acknowledging their worth, and finding strength together. One morning, they came across a small grove of trees near a hidden spring. The area was secluded and offered shade from the sun. They decided to rest and replenish their water supply. As Nima knelt by the spring to fill her container, Ethan watched her quietly. He noticed the care with which she handled every task, the patience and thoughtfulness she applied even to simple actions. It was a reflection of her character, precise, deliberate, and deeply connected to the world around her. He admired her in silence, realizing how much her presence had changed his own perspective on survival and trust. During this rest, Nima began teaching Ethan small survival skills she had learned from her people. She showed him how to identify edible plants, how to track animals, and how to use natural materials for shelter. Ethan listened intently, eager to learn, recognizing that her knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Nima took pleasure in sharing her skills, seeing Ethan's determination to understand and apply them. Their partnership was evolving into something more profound: mutual respect, shared knowledge, and growing reliance on each other. As the days passed, they faced smaller challenges that tested their collaboration. Crossing a steep ridge, navigating a rocky canyon, and avoiding natural hazards all required careful planning and communication. Nima and Ethan learned to anticipate each other's actions, moving in harmony to avoid danger and conserve energy. Each success reinforced their confidence in one another and deepened their trust. They were no longer simply traveling companions. They had become a team, relying on each other's strengths to navigate the unpredictable world around them. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire, Ethan spoke quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've faced many dangers in my life," he said, "but I've never met anyone like you. You see things others miss. You think ahead. You act without fear when it matters most." Nima felt a quiet warmth at his words. She had never sought praise, but acknowledgement from someone she respected gave her a sense of affirmation. She realized that her courage, skill, and determination were not just survival tools. They were qualities that defined her as a person. Nima, in turn, expressed her appreciation for Ethan. "You trust me," she said softly. "Even when it was hard to know if I could be trusted, you believed in me. That has made a difference." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Trust was not given lightly, and their shared experiences had shown that it could be earned through consistent action, courage, and reliability. Both recognized that this trust formed the foundation of a bond stronger than fear or circumstance. The nights continued to offer moments of reflection. The stars stretched across the sky, vast and unchanging, a reminder of the world's immensity. In these moments, Nima and Ethan found comfort in each other's presence. Silence between them was no longer awkward. It was peaceful, a space in which they could feel connected without needing words. They shared a sense of companionship that transcended the challenges of survival, an understanding that they were not alone in facing the vastness of the plains. During one particularly quiet morning, Nima and Ethan came across a small herd of deer grazing near a stream. Nima whispered instructions on how to approach without disturbing them, demonstrating patience and observation. Ethan followed her guidance, learning to move with care and precision. The exercise strengthened their coordination and highlighted the importance of collaboration. More than that, it was a moment of shared appreciation for the natural world, a reminder that even in a dangerous environment, beauty and learning existed. Through these shared experiences, their bond grew deeper. They began to rely not only on skills and knowledge, but also on each other's judgment and instincts. Nima's insights into the land complemented Ethan's strategic thinking and experience with survival tactics. Together, they had become more than the sum of their parts. They faced each challenge as a unit, understanding that their combined efforts increased their chances of success and safety. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the plains in shades of orange and purple, Ethan and Nima sat quietly, reflecting on their journey. The days of fear, uncertainty, and danger had shaped them both. They had learned to trust each other, to communicate without words, and to recognize the strength in one another. For Nima, the journey had transformed her from someone kneeling in desperation to someone standing confidently as a capable partner. For Ethan, it had opened his eyes to the value of trust, collaboration, and shared humanity. By the time night fell completely, the fire they had built burned low, casting flickering shadows on the rocks around them. They settled close together, alert but able to rest, knowing that their partnership had evolved into something rare and vital. In the quiet of the plains, they had found not only safety and survival, but also understanding, respect, and a growing sense of companionship. Nima reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the moment she had knelt, offering her life in exchange for safety, and the days that had followed, filled with testing, learning, and growing trust. She realized that courage was not merely about facing danger, but also about opening oneself to connection and cooperation. Ethan had become more than a protector. He was a partner, a witness to her strength and resilience. Ethan, lying close to the fire, considered the changes he had seen in Nima. Her courage, intelligence, and understanding of the land had proven invaluable, but more than that, her presence had transformed the journey itself. He realized that survival in the plains was not just about skill or strategy. It was about trust, cooperation, and the recognition of another's humanity. In Nima, he had found all of these qualities and more, and their shared experiences had forged a bond that neither had anticipated but both valued deeply. As the night deepened, the plains settled into a gentle rhythm of sounds, the distant rustle of leaves, the faint calls of nocturnal animals, and the whispering wind. Within this quiet, Nima and Ethan found a rare sense of peace. They had faced danger, navigated challenges, and learned to trust each other fully. Their bond had grown stronger, built on shared experience, mutual respect, and the understanding that they were no longer simply surviving. They were thriving together in their own cautious, deliberate way. The plains stretched endlessly beneath the morning sun, golden and vast. Landscape both beautiful and unforgiving. Nima and Ethan moved slowly, alert, their senses tuned to the wind, the distant calls of birds, and the subtle shifts of the terrain. The events of the past weeks had strengthened them, individually and together. Their trust had grown, their bond had deepened, and the once fragile connection born of desperation had transformed into a resilient partnership. They had faced threats, navigated dangers, and learned to rely on each other fully. Yet, the journey ahead was still uncertain. Nima walked with confidence, her steps steady, her eyes scanning the land with a practiced gaze. She had learned to interpret even the smallest signs, the tracks of animals, the rustling of grass, the faintest odor carried by the wind. Her skill in reading the environment had saved them more than once, and Ethan had come to rely on her insight as much as he relied on his own experience. He walked beside her, sometimes observing, sometimes silently commenting, each aware that survival demanded attention, awareness, and careful planning. By mid-morning, they reached a small valley that offered shelter and water. The valley was serene, a stark contrast to the harsh expanses they had traversed. Here, they could rest, replenish their supplies, and consider their next steps. Nima knelt by the stream, filling containers and letting the cool water refresh her senses. Ethan watched her, noticing the calm focus with which she approached each task. She moved with intention, a quiet strength that spoke of resilience, intelligence, and adaptability. As they rested, Ethan spoke of the possibilities that lay ahead. "We can continue north," he said thoughtfully, "towards safer lands and settlements. Or we can remain here, learning the ways of this place and building a life suited to the plains." Nima listened carefully, weighing their options. The thought of settlement stirred both curiosity and caution in her. While safety might be found there, the connection to the plains, the land she knew and understood, held a power she could not ignore. After a moment of reflection, she spoke. "We can survive anywhere, as long as we remain aware, careful, and together. The choice is ours." Their conversation was interrupted by movement near the edge of the valley. Nima's instincts immediately alerted her to potential danger. Ethan moved beside her, and together they observed a small group of travelers approaching. The strangers were not raiders, but settlers seeking passage or refuge. Nima and Ethan exchanged a glance, recognizing the need for caution. Yet the encounter required not fear, but careful assessment and diplomacy. They stepped forward to meet the newcomers, demonstrating openness but maintaining vigilance. Through careful conversation, it became clear that the travelers posed no threat. They sought guidance, water, and safe passage through the plains. Nima and Ethan shared what they could, providing knowledge of the land, the safest routes, and the resources available. In doing so, they realized how far they had come, not only in terms of survival, but in confidence, skill, and mutual understanding. Their ability to guide others reflected their mastery of the environment and the strength of their partnership. As the travelers continued on their way, Nima and Ethan settled once more by the stream, reflecting on their journey. The plains had tested them, teaching lessons in courage, trust, and resilience. Nima thought back to the moment she had first knelt before Ethan, offering her life in exchange for a chance to survive. It seemed like a lifetime ago, a moment of desperation that had set in motion a journey of growth, learning, and unexpected companionship. She realized that her courage had been measured not by the absence of fear, but by the decisions she had made in the face of it. Ethan, in turn, reflected on the transformation he had witnessed in Nima and within himself. He had arrived on the plains cautious and skeptical, relying on experience and instinct to navigate dangers. Yet, through their shared experiences, he had learned the importance of trust, cooperation, and understanding. Nima's insight, intelligence, and courage had taught him to see beyond immediate threats, to recognize potential, and to value partnership over isolation. Their journey had not only strengthened their ability to survive, but had reshaped their understanding of resilience and human connection. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the valley, they prepared to continue their journey. The plains stretched endlessly before them, but they no longer felt the isolation that had haunted them at the beginning. Together, they had transformed uncertainty into confidence, danger into opportunity, and fear into mutual respect. Their steps were deliberate, each movement a reflection of skill, awareness, and the knowledge that they could rely on one another in the face of any challenge. In the late afternoon, they came across a ridge overlooking a wide, fertile plain below. The sight was breathtaking. Green grasses stretched to the horizon, dotted with patches of wildflowers and small clusters of trees. A river wound through the landscape, promising water and life. For a moment, both paused, taking in the view. The plains had tested them, challenged them, and shaped them, but beyond lay a world of possibilities. They recognized that survival was no longer just about facing danger. It was about choice, opportunity, and the ability to shape their future. Nima spoke first, her voice quiet but firm. "We have learned to survive. We have learned to trust. Now we can choose what comes next." Ethan nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Their journey had brought them to this point not by chance, but through skill, courage, and the growing bond that had developed between them. The choices before them were theirs alone, guided by experience and strengthened by partnership. As they descended into the fertile plain, they began to plan for the days ahead. They discussed strategies for finding food, securing shelter, and maintaining safety. They shared responsibilities, blending their skills and knowledge to create a plan that would ensure not only survival, but comfort and stability. For the first time, the future felt tangible rather than uncertain. They understood that their journey had transformed them. Fear had been replaced by confidence, desperation by purpose, and isolation by companionship. Over the next few days, they explored the plain, discovering small clusters of wildlife, hidden streams, and areas rich with edible plants. Nima's knowledge of the land guided them, while Ethan's experience in strategy and observation ensured that they moved safely and efficiently. Together, they built temporary shelters, collected resources, and tested routes for future travel. Their cooperation was seamless, a reflection of the trust and understanding they had cultivated. As evening fell one night, they sat together by a small fire, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. The silence was comforting, a space for reflection and gratitude. Nima thought of her family, of the journey that had separated her from them, and of the strength she had discovered within herself. Ethan considered the growth he had witnessed, the lessons he had learned, and the companionship that had become a vital part of his life. In that moment, they recognized that their bond had become more than a necessity. It was a source of strength, hope, and shared purpose. The plains, once vast and intimidating, now seemed filled with opportunity. Each day brought challenges, but also the promise of progress, connection, and achievement. Nima and Ethan had transformed from strangers brought together by circumstance into partners guided by mutual respect and understanding. Their journey had tested their courage, endurance, and trust, and in doing so had prepared them for whatever lay ahead. One morning, as the sun rose over the fertile plains, they came across a small settlement in the distance. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, and the sounds of life, voices, animals, and movement reached their ears. Nima paused, considering the possibilities. Settlement life offered safety, community, and resources, but it also required adaptation, compromise, and adjustment. Ethan shared her thoughts, understanding the balance between security and independence. Together, they decided to approach cautiously, guided by the same careful observation and strategic thinking that had served them so well on the plains. As they entered the settlement, they were greeted by curious but friendly faces. They shared their story cautiously, revealing only what was necessary to ensure trust and safety. Their skills, knowledge of the land, and experience in survival impressed the settlers. Over time, Nima and Ethan found a place within this new community, applying the lessons they had learned to help others, navigate challenges, and create a sense of security. Their journey had not ended. It had transformed, opening the door to a life enriched by experience, partnership, and understanding. In the quiet moments, away from the bustle of the settlement, Nima and Ethan often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From the moment she had knelt in desperation to the days of survival, testing, and growing trust, they had traveled far, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Their bond had become a testament to courage, resilience, and the power of human connection. Each had discovered strength they had not fully recognized before, and together, they had proven that even in the harshest environments, trust, cooperation, and understanding could create hope, stability, and a future worth striving for. As the sun set on the plains, casting a warm glow over the settlement, Nima and Ethan stood side by side, looking out over the landscape. They had survived, they had grown, and they had found not only safety but purpose. The journey that began with desperation had ended with possibility, shaped by courage, partnership, and the recognition of each other's worth. In the vastness of the world, they had found something rare and enduring, a bond forged in adversity, strengthened by trust, and capable of guiding them toward whatever came next.